Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that this film contains images of people who have passed.
Entering the museum in the former police station in Bridgetown, we find a steamer trunk, a trunk that once held all the belongings and dreams of Frank Durbin and his family. They and thousands of other British families came to Western Australia 100 years ago, dreaming of a better future.
Frank Durbin was a 40-year-old clerk. He and his wife Catherine and young son Frank Jr. Decided to join the Soldier Settlement Scheme and become a group settler in 1925.
The Durbins and thousands of other British families came to Western Australia 100 years ago under a Western Australia state government group settlement scheme. The advertising promised the groupies, as they would be called, an escape from poverty, grimy cities and a class-ridden society. Columnists reported that the farming experience was not even necessary. The new arrivals could learn on the job.
Working under competent supervision, inspired by the knowledge that they are creating for themselves homes and independence, the atmosphere is one of enthusiasm. Solitude, that curse of pioneering in other days, is unknown. Schools provide the educational wants of the children.
Sound too good to be true? It was. The reality they faced when they arrived was very, very different. Frank and his family had been conned. As one former groupie wrote in later years,
"We were just dumped down in a small clearing in the bush, 20 families, miles from anywhere. 2 families in a small tin shack, no stoves to cook with. At first, a very limited supply of provisions, no conveniences of any kind, and worst of all, nearly everyone down with dysentery." This was also entirely different from what we had been led to expect. That disillusionment was bound to follow.
but the British were not the only ones taken in by the WA government's slick marketing campaign. Hundreds of Australians like George and Edith Osborne, with kids in tow, also took the bait and became groupies.
Initially, all of the group settlers were Australian. The first 40 groups around Manjimup, Pemberton, Busselton were all Australians, and it wasn't until Group 41, this first group in Denmark, that English settlers started coming into the scheme.
The group settlement scheme was certainly ambitious. Thousands of families were to be settled on land that extended from Busselton and through the forests of the southwest to Denmark on the south coast.
The deal was that they would work in groups for a sustenance payment of 3 shillings a day, and they would work in groups of 20 men to clear a property, some 20 to 25 acres, 20 partly cleared, 5 acres cleared so it could be cultivated, and in return they would be placed on a property with a bungalow, with a water supply, with some stock, cattle, horses, pigs, and some machinery. And they would be able to then work that property and pay the debt off, which was owed on the property, and then when the debt was paid, the farm would be theirs.
They got a spade and an axe and perhaps a cow, but probably not right at the beginning.
The cow was important because Premier Mitchell and the West Australian government had devised and promoted the scheme primarily to build a dairy industry.
At the time the group settlement scheme was established, Western Australia was importing butter, cheese, ham, bacon to the value of about £970,000 a year, and the state wanted to avoid that and, if possible, provide a surplus which would be able to be sold to the eastern states and therefore bring income.
Having arrived, whether you were an Aussie like the Osbornes or a POM like Frank Durbin, your first job as a groupie was to start clearing the land.
Then they would build a humpy on the first block, and the first family would move into it. They'd build humpies on all the blocks. We do have a group humpy in the museum, which shows how they would have lived in those days, which is pretty horrific. After the humpy, and they were still clearing blocks at the same time as building all these things, they would then start building the houses. Now, the houses were built with a grant from the government, which they had to pay back.
On the grounds of the Busselton Historical Society Museum, there is an actual group settlement house.
all pretty much the same design, and this is an original group design with the 2 rooms at the front, the main lounge room, which we've put in as a lounge dining room, which it was used for, the main parents' bedroom, kitchen behind the lounge room, second bedroom and front and back veranda.
The life of groupies around Denmark was recorded in a remarkable series of photographs kept in the Denmark Historical Museum. Bert Saw was a local farmer, contractor and keen photographer who
did take a lot of photographs of group settlers, of the earliest housing that they had, which, as some of them said, they wouldn't even keep pigs in Britain, right through to the houses that they built and lived in. Every aspect of group settler life was recorded. Prodigious early crops of maize, all sorts of things he found of interest. So, because of course he was a farmer himself.
I think it's absolutely amazing that we have this collection for such a small rural community as it was at the time. He has documented a wide range of subjects.
The area around Denmark was regarded as prime country for farming. After all, it had produced vast stands of huge trees, but
planners of the scheme completely underestimated the complexity, the difficulty of clearing the country. The thing they did in Denmark, they looked at the Karry Hills and they assumed, a fair assumption perhaps, but a wrong assumption, they assumed that the Karry Hills would be the most fertile soil, but they completely underestimated the difficulty of clearing the forests. And they talked a lot about the size of the trees and their majestic size and so on, but they really didn't think through and work out how they were going to clear all of these forests.
And when the land was cleared, the Denmark farmers faced a new problem.
In looking at the country and deciding that the Karry Hills were the best place to have the farms, it wasn't realised that the heavy rainfall on the hills was leaching trace elements from the soil. And it wasn't until 1935 that Underwood and Filmer from the Department of Agriculture discovered that small traces of cobalt and copper needed to be added to the animals' food to allow them to survive. Otherwise, they simply died.
The group settlement scheme was plagued with problems. The government faced substantial budget overruns and questions were raised about its viability almost from the outset. However, the Osborne family had fared better than most.
They had lots of children. They had a property that had been previously milled, so it was less difficult to clear. And really, they had off-farm income. So when railways and road works were needed, some of the boys, the older boys, went off and brought income in from that.
There came a time when even George and Edith called it a day. But this groupie story had a happy ending.
A time came when the family as a whole decided to go back to Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie in our family was the promised land. It was the land of hope and of success and future happiness. And so my grandparents did leave Denmark and return to Kalgoorlie, and they said to my father, "You stay, make sure the cows don't wander off and get lost. We'll sell the farm and then you can join us in Kalgoorlie." Well, of course, the farm couldn't be sold because there were lots of abandoned farms in the district. And so my father stayed. He stayed to look after the property, and a time came when his mind changed and he decided that he wanted to stay. And he married, had a family, got involved in the community and had then many reasons to stay. And I'm glad that he did.